All right, so now we are moving along here to Blake's the Book of Ahania, and it's a much shorter text than the Book of Urizen, and it's essentially a sequel because it picks up where that book left off with Fuson in the role of Moses. And here we have the opening plate image is an image of Urizen, who has created Ahania, first originally as an object of pleasure. So in that sense, she was in the role of Aphrodite, Venus, let's say, sexually pleasing to him. And then at the end of the text, she will lament that he turned against her in jealousy and brought the moral law down upon her, and she became identified with sin. And so this is the telos of the book. This is where it ends with them in this role here. Okay, so let's take a look at, this is the title page of the Book of Ahania, and here's Ahania soaring on her merry way. And then I was only able to find the illuminated Blake's script for this first page here, so I'll have to use a digital copy for the middle pages, but it's not very long. So as it begins, the Book of Ahania, written in 1795, chapter the first. Fuson, on a chariot iron-winged on spiked flames rose, his hot visage flamed furious. Sparkles his hair and beard shot down his wide bosom and shoulders. On clouds of smoke rages his chariot, and his right hand burns red in its cloud, molding into a vast globe his wrath, as the thunderstone is molded, son of Urizen's silent burnings. And so here he's almost in the role of the pursuing army, like Pharaoh riding in his chariot pursuing the Israelites, rather than Moses leading the Israelites out. And so he's going to go to war against Urizen, his father. Shall we worship this demon of smoke, said Fuson, this abstract non-entity, this cloudy god seated on waters, now seen, now obscured, king of sorrow? So he's completely rebellious, like Orc, who is also rebellious, except that Fuson is more an image of wrath, pure wrath and fury, rather than the revolutionary ardor of Orc, who wants to transform and change things and bring about a new order. Fuson simply wants to overthrow his father and take over his throne, like Kronos in the myth of Uranus and Gaia. So he spoke in a fiery flame, on Urizen frowning indignant, the globe of wrath shaking on high. Roaring with fury, he threw the howling globe. Burning it flew, lengthening into a hungry beam. And so he has his weapon is a globe that he has transformed into a beam that is homologous with the pillar of fire that the Hebrews followed through the desert. Here, though, it's a weapon. Swiftly opposed to the exulting flamed beam, the broad disk of Urizen upheaved across the void many a mile. And so Urizen's weapon, and they're both drawn from their loins, from their genitals, these weapons. Urizen's weapon is a disk. It was forged in mills where the winter beats incessant. 10 winters the disk unremitting endured the cold hammer. But the strong arm that sent it remembered the sounding beam. Laughing, it tore through that beaten mass, keeping its direction, the cold loins of Urizen dividing. So that's where it's come from, the loins of Urizen. Dire shrieked his invisible lust, deep groaned Urizen, stretching his awful hand. Ahania, so named his parted soul, he seized on his mountains of jealousy. He groaned anguished and called her sin, kissing her and weeping over her, then hid her in darkness and silence, jealous though she was invisible. So Ahania is already there. She's already there in a kind of spiritual form as a presence. She fell down, a faint shadow wandering in chaos and circling dark Urizen as the moon anguished circles the earth, hopeless, abhorred, a death shadow, unseen, unbodied, unknown, the mother of pestilence. But the fiery beam of Fuson was a pillar of fire to Egypt, 500 years wandering on earth, till Los seized it and beat in a mass with the body of the sun. So Los seized the fiery beam of Fuson, and he uses it to forge the sun. Let's see, so we don't have any of Blake's text here, so we have to use a digital copy for continuing. So here we have chapter 2. But the forehead of Urizen gathering, and his eyes pale with anguish, his lips blue and changing, in tears and bitter contrition, he prepared his bow. And so now he's going to make another weapon to fight against his son Fuson. and he's going to slay a dragon and take its ribs and make the bow from its ribs and the string from its sinews, formed of ribs, that in his dark solitude, when obscured in his forests, fell monsters arose. Fell is an old word for fallen or creepy monsters. For his dire contemplations rushed down like floods from his mountains in torrents of mud settling thick with eggs of unnatural production. Forthwith hatching, some howled on his hills, some in vales, some aloft flew in air. Of these, an enormous dread serpent, scaled and poisonous, horned, approached Urizen, even to his knees, as he sat on his dark-rooted oak. With his horns he pushed furious. Great the conflict and great the jealousy and cold poisons, but Urizen smote him. First he poisoned the rocks with his blood, then polished his ribs and his sinews, laid them apart till winter. Then a bow black prepared. On this bow, a poisoned rock placed in silence. He uttered these words to the bow. So now he's taken a rock and put poison from presumably the dragon's blood, onto the rock, and then he's going to fire the rock, and it's going to fall to earth and become Mount Sinai. O bow of the clouds of secrecy, O nerve of that lust-formed monster, send this rock swift, invisible through the black clouds, on the bosom of Fuson. So saying, in torment of his wounds, he bent the enormous ribs slowly, a circle of darkness, then fixed the sinew in its rest, then the rock, poisonous source, placed with art, lifting difficult its weighty bulk, silent the rock lay. While Fuson his tigers unloosing, so now apparently he has, Fuson has tigers for his weapons. Thought Urizen slain by his wrath. I am God, said he, eldest of things. So he thinks he's already slain Urizen, and he himself, he can now proclaim himself as God. Sudden sings the rock, swift and invisible, on Fuson flew, entered his bosom, his beautiful visage, his tresses, and this is meant to suggest the tresses of Absalom in the Old Testament, that gave light to the mornings of heaven, were smitten with darkness, deformed and outstretched on the edge of the forest. But the rock fell upon the earth, Mount Sinai, in Arabia. That's pretty cool. I love Blake's wild imagination. So chapter 3, then, the globe shook, and Urizen, seated on black clouds, his sore wound anointed, the ointment flowed down on the void, mixed with blood. Here the snake gets her poison. With difficulty and great pain, Urizen lifted on high the dead corpse, in other words. This is so now he has slain Fuson. So he picks up his corpse, and he's going to crucify him and nail him to the tree of mystery, which is a tree that grows out of the mind of Urizen. With difficulty and great pain, Urizen lifted on high the dead corpse. On his shoulders he bore it, to where a tree hung over the immensity. For when Urizen shrunk away from eternals, he sat on a rock barren, a rock which himself from redounding fancies had petrified. Many tears fell on the rock, many sparks of vegetation. From eternals he sat, many sparks of vegetation soon shot the pained root of mystery under his heel. It grew a thick tree. He wrote in silence his book of iron. So now he's writing a new set of laws, but this is a book of iron, whereas before in the first book of Urizen we had seen him writing a book of brass. Till the horrid plant, bending its boughs, grew to roots when it felt the earth, and again sprung to many a tree. Amazed started Urizen, when he beheld himself compassed round and high-roofed over with trees. He arose, but the stems stood so thick he with difficulty and great pain brought his books, all but the book of iron, from the dismal shade. So he leaves the book of iron behind in the cosmic tree here that is analogous to, let's say, the Scandinavian tree Yggdrasil, which is the cosmic tree in the branches of which the stars hang. The tree still grows over the void, enrooting itself all around an endless labyrinth of woe. The course of his first begotten, on the accursed tree of mystery, on the topmost stem of this tree, Urizen nailed Fuson's course. So he hangs Fuson on the tree of mystery. So then chapter 4, Forth flew the arrows of pestilence round the pale living corse on the tree. And so that, though Fuson is apparently still alive when he does this, and he's hanging in agony on this tree, and they're firing, presumably Urizen and his people are firing arrows at him. It's meant to represent the image of, or evoke the image of Saint Sebastian with all the arrows in him. For in Urizen's slumbers of abstraction in the infinite ages of eternity, when his nerves of joy melted and flowed, a white lake on the dark blue air, in perturbed pain and dismal torment, now stretching out, now swift conglobing. Effluvia vapored above in noxious clouds, these hovered thick over the disorganized immortal, till petrific pain scurfed o'er the lakes as the bones of man, solid and dark. And so now the clouds of disease hovered wide around the immortal in torment, perching around the hurtling bones, disease on disease, shape on shape, winged screaming in blood and torment. The eternal prophet, now the eternal prophet is of course a reference to Los. The eternal prophet beat on his anvils and raged in the desolate darkness. He forged nets of iron around, and Los threw them around the bones. The shapes screaming fluttered vain, some combined into muscles and glands, some organs for craving and lust. Most remained on the tormented void, Urizen's army of horrors. And so some of them, these bones, then are reanimated by Los, and some of them are formed into Urizen's soldiers from his army of horrors. Round the pale living corse on the tree, 40 years flew the arrows of pestilence, just as the Hebrews wandered in the desert for 40 years. Wailing and terror and woe ran through all his dismal world. 40 years, all his sons and daughters felt their skulls harden. Then Asia arose in the pendulous deep. So now Asia comes into being, whereas we had seen that at the conclusion of the Book of Urizen, Africa had come into being. But here now we see the birth of Asia, but it's a primordial sort of prehistoric Asia in which we get, it's filled with monsters and reptiles, and almost as though Blake were foreseeing the discovery of dinosaurs that would take place in the middle of the 19th century. He says, they reptilize upon the earth. Fuson groaned on the tree. And so that brings us up to chapter 5. The lamenting voice of Ahania. Now Ahania is there, weeping upon the void, and round the tree of Fuson, distant in solitary night, her voice was heard, but no form had she, but her tears from clouds eternal fell round the tree. And Ahania's name suggests the name of Athena, and she too was born parthenogenically from the mind, or the brain, the head of Zeus. So she's meant to evoke that, but also Aphrodite. She begins as a figure of pleasure for Urizen, sexually speaking, and then he condemns her and she becomes the personification of sin. So she is both Athena and Aphrodite, but also she is Sophia, the consort of Yahweh in the book of Proverbs. And the voice cried, Ah, Urizen, love, flower of morning, I weep on the verge of non-entity. How wide the abyss between Ahania and thee! I lie on the verge of the deep, I see thy dark clouds ascend, I see thy black forests and floods, a horrible waste to my eyes. Weeping I walk over rocks, over dens and through valleys of death. Why didst thou despise, Ahania, to cast me from thy bright presence into the world of loneness? I cannot touch his hand, nor weep on his knees, nor hear his voice and bow, nor see his eyes and joy, nor hear his footsteps, and my heart leap at the lovely sound. I cannot kiss the place whereon his bright feet have trod, but I wander on the rocks with hard necessity. Where is my golden palace? Where my ivory bed? Where the joy of my morning hour? Where the sons of eternity singing? So she's lamenting, almost like Demeter lamenting the loss of her daughter Persephone and trying to find her. To awake bright Urizen, my king, to arise to the mountain sport, to the bliss of eternal valleys, to awake my king in the morn, to embrace Ahania's joy on the breadth of his open bosom, from my soft cloud of dew to fall in showers of life on his harvests. When he gave my happy soul to the sons of eternal joy, when he took the daughters of life into my chambers of love, when I found babes of bliss on my beds and bosoms of milk in my chambers filled with eternal seed, O eternal birth sung round Ahania, in interchange sweet of their joys. Now this inserts a chapter 5 here, but the text I'm reading does not. Swelled with ripeness and fat with fatness, bursting on winds my odors, my ripe figs and rich pomegranates in infant joy at thy feet. And those are, of course, metaphors for her sex organs. O Urizen sported and sang. Then thou with thy lap full of seed, we know what that refers to, of course, with thy handful of generous fire walked forth from the clouds of morning, on the virgins of springing joy, on the human soul to cast the seed of eternal silence. The seed of eternal science, rather, which is a constricting force, of course. The sweat poured down thy temples to Ahania, returned in evening. The moisture awoke to birth my mother's joys, sleeping in bliss. But now alone over rocks, mountains, cast out from thy lovely bosom, cruel jealousy, selfish fear, self-destroying, how can delight renew in these chains of darkness, where bones of beasts are strewn on the bleak and snowy mountains, where bones from the birth are buried before they see the light? And so that's the Book of Ahania, and it may have been begun actually it is a sequel to the Book of Urizen, but since the Book of Urizen was originally called the first Book of Urizen, he may have intended this to be called the second Book of Urizen, but instead called it the Book of Ahania. And to be honest, it feels incomplete to me. And Blake was starting to move into the troubled period where, after the Book of Loss, which we'll read in the next video, where he was composing the four Zoas, which was as coming up on his Uranus opposite Uranus breakthrough. Right around the age of 38, he starts working on the four Zoas, which is an epic. It's gigantic. It's a huge epic that he never finished and struggled with for 10 years. And he was going through a rough time during that period. And he struggled with it. And what we have of it is fragmentary, incomplete. There's a lot of it, but it's a rough draft, actually. And but it is, Northrop Frye called it the greatest abortive work of English literature. So it's long. I would like to do a series on it, but it's a long text. So that's a maybe. That all depends. All right, so we'll leave it there with the Book of Ahania, and next up then is the Book of Laws.